We're speaking now with Zina Brodovsky from Odessa in the from the former Soviet Union. And you have quite a compelling story to tell about your experience living under Marxism, Leninism, or socialism. And so what I'd like you to do is first tell us a little bit about your childhood and growing up there in Odessa, and what are your earliest recollections?
My early recollections that my parents never talk about anything really at home. At school, we were taught how beautiful our country is, and that everybody needs to go and work very hard to get the most beautiful idea to bring it in life, the communism. And that was the whole theme from the very early childhood through the school, through the university.
Now, who was the Soviet premier at that time, when you were young and in school?
I remember very well Khrushchev, Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev, Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev, and Andropov, Chernenko a little bit, because it was very short time, and then Gorbachev. But
you have no personal recollections of Stalin?
No.
No. Okay. So, growing up in this society, and where everything is for the state and for the glorification of communism, what was your first indication or feeling that maybe something wasn't quite right?
I believe it was after school. Because the whole life of everybody over there, it was one big lie from the beginning to the end. And little by little, people started to understand that this is just, everything was lie. And when leader after leader died, next leader became the greatest leader again, the dearest leader. It was such a cult of the leaders that people, young people, started to realize that something was wrong. And so whenever, whoever leader was at that time, everybody knew that whatever leader was talking about, he was lying. So we knew that he was lying, and the government knew that we knew that they were lying to us.
Now, in your daily life, going to school, going to the store, getting an education, applying for a job, the government was involved in every stage and every step along the way. Is that correct? Tell us where you lived and all of those things. What did the government control?
Everything. Everything belonged to the government. Everything. From the daycare of the infant through the kindergarten, schools, universities, colleges, vocational schools, housing, manufacturers, mines, everything, airplanes, trains, you name it, everything belonged to the government. Nothing belonged to the people.
Now, some people would say, but this was in an effort to make things more fair and to share equally amongst all the people. What was the actual result for the people in your country?
Well, it was a saying in our country that we work as hard and as much as government pays to us. It means that everybody was trying to work less because the money everybody was getting wasn't enough to live on.
So there was really no incentive. Now, was there an underground economy? Was there black market?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a big, big black market. And so sometimes people were arrested, black marketers. However, the whole system of the Soviet Union, it was one huge corruption, lies, corruptions, theft. Everybody could steal as much as they could, and the officials were very often on bribes.
And I take it that this created resentment amongst the people because they would know that this was going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when Stalin died in 1953, and Nikita Khrushchev started talking about what happened in Stalin's era, people were shocked. But right now, I understand that not everybody was shocked, because people were living through these terrible, terrible years. Nobody was talking about that.
Well, they were afraid to.
Absolutely, because either they were, if they would be talking about that, they would put either to concentration camps or shot on the spot. But the more time passed by, people started realizing that something was wrong with the system. That's why we had a lot of black market, and the system was really falling apart. That's why the Soviet Union fell apart.
So now you got married, and I presume had some children, and then at some point your husband was able to leave the Soviet Union. Is that correct?
Yeah, my husband left Soviet Union in 1977.
Now, you weren't able to come with him at that time, and tell us why, and how did you eventually make it out of the Soviet Union?
Well, both parents were very sick, and I couldn't leave them. And after their death, I was able to live with my daughter. We came here in America.
Now, you told me that it took quite a while for you to make that happen, that the first couple of times that you tried to leave, they wouldn't let you leave.
No, they wouldn't. In 1986, I believe it was November or December, I was called to KGB, and it was, I don't know, 8, 10 big men in uniforms, and I was just by myself over there, and they started threatening me that if I am going to leave, they're going to send me 100 kilometers outside of the city, Odessa, and that I would never be able to leave Soviet Union. But then, at the beginning of '97, Gorbachev all of a sudden said, whoever wants to leave can leave. Not everybody, but who had right, an invitation to leave. So I went to the KGB again, and it was huge, huge crowd of people who wanted to leave. And the officer, a woman officer, came over to me. She remembered me and said, if you want to leave, you can leave now, but you need to get a written permission from your brother. So I got a permission from my brother, and From Odessa we went to Moscow, and when we were at the airport, my daughter was 17 and a half, no, not even 17 and a half, less a little bit, at that time, and it was 2 booths that we have to go through in the airport to, and I went through one booth, and they steered my daughter through another booth.
It's okay. It's all right. This is a very emotional thing for people who have actually lived through this kind of government control, and we certainly appreciate and understand that, and we appreciate you telling your story here. So your daughter went through the other booth, and they interrogated her differently. Is that what happened?
No, the border patrol officer that were at the booth started talking to her. They try.
That's all right. Did they try to convince her not to leave? They tried to make her feel bad about leaving?
Yeah, they intimidated her.
But she wanted to be with her mother.
Yeah. So finally she left.
So you were able to make it out together.
Mm.
In this country, we hear so oftentimes that the problem with free enterprise or capitalism is that the big corporations, the big companies, have a monopoly. That they're a monopoly, and that this is what causes the problem with capitalism and free enterprise. What kind of a monopoly is a Marxist-Leninist government?
That's what I want to ask you. What kind of a monopoly when the government controls everything? What kind of a monopoly is it?
They control the law, the legal system, the press?
Everything. And I want to talk to you about the press.
Okay.
I was very young. I was 19 years old when I started working for the regional newspaper. It was Russian and Ukrainian newspaper, the same newspaper in Russian and Ukrainian. At that time, something happened in the farms, and the stock started dying by hundreds. And the reporters went to the villages to see what was going on, because it was a regional newspaper. And when they came from the villages, from the farms, they told us, people who were working at the newspapers, that stock was dying by hundreds, if not thousands. But in their articles, everyone was very nice. Nothing was dying. The stock was nice and live, whatever. So it's, again, the lies that we live through. It's just unbelievable. Nobody was telling the truth, ever.
Well, this leads us into now something that you and I had talked about off camera, and that is the famine in the Ukraine. And let me just set it up by saying that you've brought some material here today that we're going to talk about the famine in the Ukraine during the time of Stalin. And there was a New York Times reporter who was the Moscow bureau chief for the New York Times. His name was Walter Duranty. And during the time of the Ukrainian famine, Duranty wrote for the New York Times and said that there were sporadic instances of malnutrition. But the truth, the real story, was much, much worse than that.
Actually, there were 2 famines. One in 1921, shortly after the revolution, and people started dying from starvation, and the city didn't have any food for the workers. So the government, Soviet government, send military units to the villages to take food from the villagers. And whoever refused to do it was shot on the spot. That was shortly after revolution. It was, people call it Red Terror. Red Terror. Second time it happened during the collectivization in the 1931-32. That was, at that time, it was man-made starvation for the Ukrainian people.
Now, when you say man-made, this means that someone in the government decided that there would be a famine?
I don't know if they decided that it would be a famine. I cannot tell you that, but what I can tell you that at that time the collectivization started. So when in 1918 the peasants were given a land, promised by Lenin, were given a land and started working on the land. And the very poor peasants, they became not poor anymore because they were working. All their family was working, including little children. And so when collectivization started in 1931-32, when peasants didn't want to give it to their land to the collective farms, many of them were rooted out by hundreds of thousands, sent to the concentration camps, or to the land that was never cultivated. The grain was taken from them. And if they refused to give grain, many of them were shot on the spot. The newspapers at that time printed a story about one boy by name Pavlik Morozov. It was a real boy, Pavlik Morozov, who lived with their parents.
So just to recap, while you compose yourself, the government, Lenin, had promised bread, land, and peace to the peasants, had distributed the land, redistributed the wealth, redistributed the land. The farmers and the peasants worked the land. They were quite productive. But this was not the nature of communism. This was not Marx's idea to have the collective and people putting into the pot so that everyone could share equally. So Lenin, in his plan, decided to put all that together and try.
That was after Lenin.
Oh, it was after Lenin. Stalin. I'm sorry. Stalin, 31-32, decided that we had to get back to this Marxist idea that everyone was going to share and work collectively.
Yes.
And the peasant farmers said, no, we're doing fine. And so Stalin then said, no, we will take your grain by force and move you to different land that maybe was not nearly as productive or able to be cultivated like the farmland they had been working. So this young boy, who was a young teenager from what I understand, the armed forces came to take the grain, and this young boy did what? What did he do?
He betrayed his father. He told the military man that his father saved a small bag of grain for the family. The father was arrested and shot on the spot. And in a short while, the relatives of the father killed this boy and his younger brother. This boy, Pavlik Morozov, became a real hero of the Soviet literature, and generations of Soviet youth were reading the book about him, and it was just unbelievable that everything was upside down.
They made a hero out of a young boy who had for all intents and purposes, ratted out his father, cost him his life,
Yes.
and held him up as an example of what young people should aspire to in the Stalinist Soviet Union.
And I shall tell you that the brainwash of the population, especially the young one, was unbelievable. And he wasn't only the one who did it. Again, because of this unbelievable propaganda, unbelievable brainwash that actually from the time the child was born through all his life.
So Marxism, Leninism, communism turns families against each other.
You may say so.
Yes. Now, the famine, the starvation in the Ukraine during this time of the collectivization was so bad. Tell us what happened. What happened to the people?
It was so bad that people became cannibals. They were eating their own children. And you can look through the internet and see the pictures of the dead body laying on the streets. And this picture, they're terrible.
And this was hidden from the whole world. They have such control over what is known and what is not known that nobody outside the Ukraine really knew what was going on.
No. At the same time when that happened, they were the movies were made, how beautiful life in the villages, in the farms, and they're singing and dancing and everything, and next door people were starving, and the bodies were everywhere.
Now, you brought a book with you here today that kind of details this. It's called A People's Tragedy, A History of the Russian Revolution. And we've marked a page here. We'll show the picture in just a moment here of the families in front of their dead relatives. And this cannibalism was, imagine the level of desperation that one must feel to engage in cannibalism, to try to save oneself from this horrible fate. And millions of people died as a result of this starvation.
Yes, they estimate that up to 12 million people died from starvation and from the result of the starvation. This is, you know what, you cannot even read these books. The heart is bleeding when you read all of this. And nobody said anything about that.
Now, Stalin said the death of one person is a tragedy, but the death of a million is a statistic. Yes. Do you think that's why a lot of people just didn't pay attention to this?
Unfortunate, people don't know the history, and history repeats itself again and again and again. And the 20th century was the most brutal century out of the whole history of the world. It was estimated that government always kills his own people, its own people. But up to the 20th century, it was estimated that different governments through the history killed about 175 million people. In the 20th century, governments killed 200 million people.
In one century. So all the governments in all of history up till the 20th century killed about 175 million, and in one century, yes, the 20th century, governments killed 200 million.
Yes. And if we are talking about Soviet government, the amount of people that was killed, absolutely innocent people that was killed during the Soviet era, nobody can tell you exactly what was the number. Some say between 20 to 50 million people. But what is absolutely sure, that millions of the absolutely innocent people were rooted out from their family, sent to concentration camps, labor camps. They were real slaves that were working to bring up the industry of the Soviet Union. And if they were dying by thousands, it didn't matter, because new thousands would come over there. It was unimaginable terror through many, many years. And nobody was saved in the Soviet Union.
Now, the promise of Marxism is a perfect society where human nature is regenerated and everyone works because it's the right thing to work, and everyone shares and gives because it's the right thing to do. And part of Marxism, or a major part of Marxism, is dialectical materialism, a term that many people here are not even familiar with. But tell us, they study dialectical materialism in the former Soviet Union, at least when you were growing up there. That was a major area of study, and basically what it said was that progress comes through change. Is that correct?
You know what? I cannot tell you, because I never even opened those books, although I passed the exam. I don't know what it is about. I cannot tell you. It was all lie. That's I know for sure.
Now, you told me the first year of university, though, it was a great study of that.
Oh, yes, everybody. In any university, it doesn't matter what you were studying.
You had to learn dialectical materialism before you could learn anything else.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Political economy, I don't know either what it is, because the teacher was my friend, and she said to me, bring me your paper, and she just put I don't know what it is about. It was all
now,
nonsense.
you came to the United States in about 1987. Is that correct?
87.
87. And what was your first impression when you came to the United States? You had come from a background of, some would say, deprivation, standing in line just to get basic necessities of life. You come to the United States, you walk into perhaps the first grocery store in the U.S. that you've ever seen, and there are shelves full of products, and no one is scrambling, fighting over anything, and no one is standing in line. And tell us, what was your impression at that?
Well, it was just unbelievable. I remember I saw on the corner the bus that was giving food to just people who were walking by. I never saw it in my life, anything like that. And not only food, the opportunities in this country, just unbelievable. And you cannot even blame American people for not knowing anything else, because they really don't know anything else. They didn't see anything different. And when here people are talking about share, social justice, I'm thinking about what happened in my country. And I'm thinking, the older I become, I think about this more and more and more.
And you want to try to help people see that you've lived through this, and you see very similar things going on in the United States today. Is that what you're saying?
I am, you know what, it's, if people don't know the history, the country is just doomed, because they don't know what is happening. And if people in this country think that nothing can ever happen to them or to this country, well, Russian people never knew that what happened would happen to them as well.
They believed what they were told by Lenin, bread, land, and peace.
Yeah, and what they got. Evil regime, millions of killed. The whole country became one huge concentration camp. lies, cannibalism. That's what they got after they started yelling, "Viva socialism! Viva socialism! Viva socialism!" And that's what socialism brought to them. Misery, slavery, unbelievable suffering by millions and millions and millions, absolutely innocent people.
Some people say that socialism or Marxism, Leninism, communism just hasn't been tried by the right people yet, that we have to get better leaders, better people, and that will make a quantitative difference in how socialism is applied here in the United States. What would you say to that?
Yeah. I would say that as many times it was tried in different countries, be this Soviet Union or European bloc that Soviets controlled until very recently, nothing worked. Whenever socialism became a regime, immediately they started concentration camps. They started putting people to concentration camps. People became slaves. They started killing people. And if they say, people are people, doesn't matter what country they live in. And the moment they control the power, that's it. They live absolutely different life from the rest of the population. They have different stores. They have different hospitals. They live like kings and queens. And the rest of the population is just slaves, no matter what country it is.
And the people who worked toward moving the government to socialism, that advocated, that marched on the street, what happened to those people when
Those people became first victims of that regime. If you look at the pictures of people who made the revolution together with Lenin, all of them were executed. If you look at the pictures of the many Politburo members that were together with Stalin, except Stalin, everybody was executed. So the very people who did the revolution, they were first to be executed.
So you feel sorry for these people that No, I'm saying in the United States right now that are advocating for this, you know they will be the first ones to suffer.
When I see these people, Wall Street,
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy Wall Street, I look at them and just, excuse me, like they're idiots. They don't know what they want. What exactly they want? They don't work. Somebody else feed them. Somebody else give them money. They have very expensive computers and telephones, etc., etc. What they want? They don't work. So what will happen to them? I know what would happen to them. I know exactly what happened to people in Russia. And there is nothing new to it. Same happened with the people during the French Revolution. When Danton was heading to the guillotine, Robespierre was watching him out of the window of his flat, and Danton cried to him, "Robespierre, you are the next one." And that happened to Robespierre as well. So nothing is new.
And the Soviet Union also would tolerate no religion either, because is not Marxism based on atheism, and they can't tolerate the church?
Well, Lenin proclaimed that the religion is the opium of the people. So there is no religion should be everywhere. The churches were closed or level. Synagogues, everything was closed. The beautiful churches and synagogues, they became either museums or gyms. And it was such a strong propaganda against any religion in the schools. And I was one of them who did it as a teacher. We were obligated. It was our first responsibility. It doesn't matter what subject you teach. That, however, I shall tell you that it cannot be empty space. Something has to fill this space, this spot of the religion. So something happened. It happened that we were all required to go forward, onward for the brightest future of the communism. So the communism became our religion.
Zina, it has been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you here today, for you to be able to tell us what is so wrong with socialism from the perspective of someone who has actually lived it.
Fortunately for me, and many of my age people, we didn't live through the horrors of the Stalin's era, where people living in absolutely terror every single day. People who went to after work to home, nobody knew who will be the next victim, that the KGB will come in the middle of the night, knock at the door, and people will disappear forever. Relatives did not know where these people went, and they couldn't even send letters. Nobody knew what happened to people, and nobody was saved. Nobody.
But this was true in any socialist government, not just the Soviet Union. True? I mean, China and East Germany and all of these countries had similar experience.
Absolutely. Cambodia, with only 7 million population, 2 million people were executed, killed. 2 million in Cambodia. And whenever socialism became a regime, people started disappearing and sent to the labor camps. And there are many books was written about that. And when you read the books and see the pictures of, you cannot really sleep at night after that.
But you came to this country, and you became a naturalized citizen, yes. And you're very happy. I can see it in your face. And you want now to tell your story to be able to help prevent this country from going down that same road.
You have to cherish this country as much as possible, because it is, if you think for one moment, why everybody from around the world wants to come here, from China, North Korea, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Romania, you name it. Everybody wants to come here, but nobody wants to go over there. Why? Because people left everything behind, their homes, their friends, their relatives, money, jobs, and came here like me without any language, any skills, nothing. Just the hope of the better future for their children. And
the promise of freedom and the opportunity to fulfill one's own destiny.
Yes. And it's, again, the only thing I can tell American people, please cherish this country. There is no other country.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and we hope that we'll have a chance to visit with you again on Western Free Press.